So the floor is yours to respond or to ask questions about Milen's presentation or Hervé's launch of the ideas that we have to discuss and debate on. I just wanted to relay a comment that Milen just made to me. There are quite a few articles on the domain, on the website, and most all of them are hard scientific ones. So maybe we should put some more articles up from the social sciences, from philosophers, from anthropologists, or ethnologists or sociologists in the future. So I see a hand right there.
I'm Martin Fischbauer from Denmark, and I'm a mouse embryologist by training. And my remark goes perhaps also in what you said just now. I think in the last 3 or so years, when it became really interesting and relevant, the discussion of germline modification or inheritable editing changed completely to almost exclusively a risk-benefit assessment. But then, I mean, we had decades of literature on what editing the germline means in terms of human nature and our identity as humans. And I think it's very risky if we kind of focus on the risk and benefit assessment, because then at some point, without even discussing whether we at all should do it, we will say, okay, in this case, the benefit is greater than the risk, and then let's do it. But whether this has an impact on the entire view on what we can do, and if we do it once, then of course you can always argue what benefit is enough and what risk is too much. And I think we should be very careful not to narrow us down to only this risk-benefit discussion.
I perfectly understand what you say. Let's say that you have two types of approach. One is a very general approach, which is the question of the human nature or the human genome, and what kind, why should we change anything about the human genome. Another thing, and which is at stake now, at least for research, is the question of gene defect. Let's say, for example, the triplet amplification in Huntington disease. You know that in the Huntington gene, we normally have less than 30 repeats of CAG bases. And when we get over 36, the disease is coming, and the more you have as an amplification, the sooner you get into the disease. And now, in addition to other tools that were already used, for example, PGD, pre-implantatory diagnosis, to prevent the occurrence of the disease, we might, because I don't know if it will be real one of these days, we might have a way to make what Francis called a surgery of genes, if it occurs to be real and safe one day. And the matter is not to intervene on the human genome at large, but to make medicine, as we have made since the origin of human beings, and to think, would it be really something attempting or condemned about the human nature to eradicate a devastating disorder such as Huntington disease that just appeared 500 years ago, because we know that the disease came from an Irish sailor that had the mutation in the 17th century. So this raised the question of the relationship of medicine to the more general question of nature.
First of all, I wanted to say that, of course, I agree with your remark, because what Hervé just said is not really answering the question of the framework discourse of risk-benefit, which is a utilitarian framing discourse. And it's culturally embedded with neocapitalism. It goes together since Smith and all, be it utilitarian. Not that I'm saying that science should not be utilitarian, but it should not be only utilitarian. And risk-benefits is not the first question we should ask. Because society, of course, wants cures and want to eradicate some illnesses. But the first question is, what kind of society are we building? And we want to be participatory agent in designing this society. We don't want to be designed by science only, because science associated to data and money makers is too much power against a society that is divided. So I think your point is extremely important. Risk-benefits is an utilitarian framework, and European philosophy and anthropology invented other discourse that I think are much more useful to the question we are asking today.
Thank you, Mylène. Okay, we have 3 questions. Sir, afterwards, sir, ma'am, and ma'am here, and then I'll take more questions out.
I'm Dirk Lanzerath. I represent here the European Network of Research Ethics Committees. In the ethics committees, we also struggle very much with those kinds of research protocols, because we cannot easily apply the regulations of genetically modified organism or so, but we can also not say, well, no problem at all. So I know very much that the answers of ethics committees differ from region to region, from country to country in these cases. So what I think what we need to have, and therefore I'm very thankful for this INSERM initiative, a platform where we have a prudential dialogue between the ethics committees and the scientists, and most of the members of the ethics committees are scientists themselves. And therefore, I'm a little bit worried about, Hervé, your concept of ethical toolbox. I'm not a native English speaker, but for me it sounds a bit more like an ethics checklist, a tick list that is easy to apply. And I think in such a dynamic system like CRISPR-Cas research, we need a much more open way to concentrate of the raising issues. And I see the scientists in a societal position, as well as the research ethics committees. Research ethics committees have an intermediary role between science and society, but also scientists have a specific societal role. It's not only about patents, it's about how can we build up a trustworthy science and research system. And that leads me from a utilitarian approach to a more Aristotelian approach from a philosophical perspective to have ethical skills in the hands of scientists themselves to improve their ethical habits. And that means we need more to invest in those dialogues between ethics committees and scientists from my perspective of the ethics committees. Not that the scientists prepare an ethics protocol and then the committees review. We need much more a dialogic system here, and I would very much recommend to use the platform here in ARRIGE to perform this and to have proceedings here. Thank you very much.
The fact that we have, I pick up this idea of ethical toolbox from the previous meeting we had in in November, and it was, for example, Johannes Rath that proposed that in some aspect or some evaluation of some regulatory process. Within this ethical toolbox, you can list the fact that we need a multidisciplinary but not only multidisciplinary, but also a multiplicity of stakeholders, including some open science, to have also to record also some views external to the research, because some of these research could be also under scrutiny to see if it's really meaningful. So the fact that we create some reference, whatever you call it, ethical toolbox or guidelines, is not antithetic with the fact that it's open, it can be changed, it can be implemented, it can be customized according to the question and according to the country or to the time. It needs to be open and dynamic, for sure. But I hear what you have already to propose, and I hope that you will be involved in this group to make more proposals. So it's great.
Okay, I have 4 questions pending. The woman sitting next to David, and then ma'am, and then you, and then sir.
My name's Françoise Bayless, and I'm here from Canada. And I just want to offer just a brief comment. 2 things. One of them is a lot of what I heard, at least in some of the presentations this morning, have emphasized the importance of science literacy for the general public. And I just want to add that it's actually also ethics literacy. So whereas the previous comment is that maybe some scientists need to learn some ethics, I actually think it's quite general, especially when you're thinking about ways of thinking about ethically complex issues. And I think it overlaps with some of the concerns that it'll all just collapse into utilitarianism. Well, we need to offer people frameworks, different ways of thinking about it, so that, for example, you could come to the conclusion that the benefits outweigh the harms, but you still don't want to do it because of how you've understood those key terms as a benefit and a harm, so it's not just narrow. And my second comment is to just say, I think if we're going to be talking genuinely about a role for the public, it's not about the past in terms of when we understood this as public education, right, that the public needed to be educated about. But I would also say it's not only just about public engagement, which seems to be sort of the next step that we understand the public can teach as well, but it really is about empowerment. And so I think that there's a real transition that needs to happen, and I don't think we're yet at the point where we're actually understanding the commitment in terms of empowerment. So I just want to put those 2 things on the table for consideration. It's science literacy and ethics literacy, and it's a move from education to engagement and to empowerment.
I of course agree with you, and I read the text you published on this issue, but I think this public engagement is linked also to the expression of toolbox, which is a Foucauldian expression. And when Foucault was speaking of toolbox, he was criticizing already the biopower of science, saying the public needs a toolbox in order to empower, get empowered by this discourse and toolbox, and to become to enter into a biosocial political engagement. And that's what Rabinov took again, which means that what is biosocial? It means that all these questions that are new to the public are linked to their bodies, and the body is a political territory. So they have a right to defend the vision of politics they have with this toolbox.
But you should emphasize the fact that in the biopower of Foucault you have a 2-sided aspect. One is continuous surveillance, but the other one is the enlargement of life. And I think that the 3-step process that Françoise just described, from education to engagement, from engagement to empowerment, will help the public, or all the ones that want to be involved, to gain the empowerment on the biopower.
Yes, but if I can add a word, when we spoke about public education, it was a way to say the public is ignorant, so it cannot take power on this discourse. And the toolbox is precisely to make a symmetry between the scientist and the public, because it's not only about science, it's about the effect of science on society.
My name is Fabiana Arzuaga. I'm from the Ministry of Science and Technology of Argentina. My question is for Hervé, and it is regarding the prohibition of the Article 13 of the Oviedo Convention that prohibits the modification of the human genome in the case it will be transferred to future generations. But in the case of curing genetic diseases, for example, after, complying with all the steps of medical research, a possible solution of the prohibition of this article may be to consider the human genome in a generic concept, or a human genome in a specific or individual concept, in which, in the case of curing an illness, you are not modifying the human genome, you are curing a disease. What do you think about, or which could be the solution for this 13 article?
This is already an open debate. The Council of Europe made the first meeting in October 2017. In its present writing, it's written any intervention that should be transmitted to descendant. So if you treat a disease which exists in the parents, you are going to change something that will be transmitted to the descendant. So in the present writing, it's forbidden. I should say also that in the present possibility, it's just impossible. We just don't know, for example, if the repair machinery exists and is at work in the zygote, which should need, or if we intervene later, we don't have any tools to ascertain the efficacy at 100% of the technique at a stage of 100 cells, for example. So at this stage, it's absolutely a question of basic fundamental research. It's just an anticipation of if it could be safe at a given time, would it be a shame to cure? And I perfectly agree that this is a matter that should be open to discussion. And luckily, we have enough time to discuss this matter and to find laws that could clearly say in which condition we should like this to occur and in which other condition we don't want that to occur.
Alexei Greenbaum, France. Fear in the history of emerging technologies is correlated to novelty. Hans Jonas called it heuristic of fear. So I think it would be counterproductive to focus on erasing fear. There's no way to erase fear. We can balance it by emphasizing other values like lucidity or responsibility that Hervé talked about. Now, what is important about these other values is that when the public evaluate them, this is not done collectively, this is done individually. Is that scientist a lucid person, a responsible person? So a big issue for this forum here is how do we go from this collective, very high-level discussion, and we've written ethical toolkits before. I was involved 10 years ago in writing an ethical toolkit for nanotechnology, so they exist. But how do we go from this very collective, very high level to individual scientists? I think that's a key challenge for this forum.
Okay, just a comment. If from now on, if everybody could make their responses and questions as short as possible, so that I can have everybody who raised their hand compose their question.
We have to find ways, and I think that just to give you one possibility is to make some aspect of education through webinars or through platforms that could allow small groups to exchange and discuss at a given time, either in a given place or at a more general point of view. Luis mentioned this morning that we need also to move from English to natural languages, so we will need to have chapters that are able to make the discussion in Spanish or in Swahili, or so we need to think of the new ways to not only be the top executive expert, but really to make what we say, which means to empower, to take the word of Françoise, to empower the colleagues or the public to really go to knowledge and possibility to voice and to have their place. So it's just a matter, I need that if we have the desire to do so, we have now the possibilities and the tools, if we disseminate enough, if we are creative enough, to allow the ones that will want to go through this to do it.
Josep Santoló from Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, an author of some of the papers Dr. Barnik mentioned. I am especially concerned on the message we are sending to the public opinion, and if we send the message that gene editing is a powerful tool, and we say something like Dr. Bolton-Bohm said, edit future generations against wrongful life, I think we are sending a message which is full of genetic determinism. And this genetic determinism, to me, is extremely dangerous in the sense that it can change or at least affect the concepts on such as concepts like racism or even legal responsibility. And I think we should be very, very careful in sending this idea that everything is written in our genes and that we are almost pushed by these genes in a specific direction. I think genetic determinism, which is a message that it's always also already in the general opinion, can be a dangerous concept that must be at least, let's say, attenuated or I don't know, but I don't know if I explain myself, but the idea is not to send this strong message of we are just genes.
This was the message I was trying to make across, and it's not my expression. And the notion of wrongful life is extremely problematic because it's very normative, and it's normative from a point of view using science knowledge. But this is not the message of science, of course. The problem is when you have scientists, and I must say, Doudna herself, when she writes in her book, because she had a part very scientific in the first part of her book, she describes the technology, she describes the hopes in terms of clinical possibilities. But in the second part, she described the ethical questions, and the ethical questions are almost transhumanist. And she says, we are going to erase all wrongful life. And this is a very dangerous discourse that scientists shouldn't be tempted to address. Because in order to be responsible, they have to have the ability to respond to the needs of the public. And this is not what the public is asking for. Thanks.
Sir?
My name is Zvonimir Kopoc from Croatia. I'm a biotechnologist. CRISPR is not my narrow field of work, and those presentations were very interesting and really very, very new in some points for me. From one side, I noticed that we have a very powerful technology, and from other side, we have public opinion, public interest. There was also a question of risks and benefit balance, and I would like to conclude or suggest maybe that the identification of those risks is really crucial, that we could expect from the public to accept that technology. So maybe we could arrange some dedicated groups which would deal with risks, with identifying a risk, and with all issues which go to the risk. And as much as risk as we know, I think that the public it would be much easier to transfer that technology to the public. So this is my opinion.
Sir, did you have a question? And Marie Guy or Ruth afterward. And then I think we'll take a break for lunch. There's a button called mic, right.
Thank you for help me. So I'm Mr. Adeyinka from Gabon. So we have discussed this CRISPR case now in Congo recently, and particularly on malaria area. So the technology is there, and we will not stop progressing. It's very helpful for scientists to modify the genome and to develop, even for vaccine today, is to use to try to eradicate diseases. But the main concern is how to guide the use of CRISPR Cas9. And all of this cannot be done without a community acceptation. So this meeting is important, and we are very happy from African side to participate in this meeting. And we would like to have kind of nuclear people to strongly discuss about the issue of the use of CRISPR case in a community level and the culturally acceptation. And also, I'm wondering where is the WHO participation? The WHO involved in this discussion of ARRIGE?
Yes, it's fundamental because, for example, the question should be raised in the cultures of certain countries of what is a mosquito, what consideration has to be seen as the change of a mosquito or the eradication of a mosquito or any other form of living organism. So, and also I remember the discussions we had in Vienna in Austria, where several people, Francine Toumi, for example, mentioned the fact that from the initiative of the millenary 2000 in Brussels to now, the burden of malaria came from 1 million deaths per year to 400,000 deaths per year. Not because of CRISPR, but because of education, education of people, prevention using nets, impregnant nets, drying waters, taking care of children when they have fevers. So clearly it's not only a matter of one technology, it's a matter of how we live into societies. And it was very interesting in the Brazzaville meeting to hear that sorrowfully, for the last 2 or 3 years, this decrease of the burden of malaria stopped, and we have an increase. And the increase is directly linked to the price of oil, because when the states have no more credits or no more money to distribute nets or to make educations, the burden is getting back. So clearly it's not only a matter of technology, it's clearly a matter of education, of policies, and intervention and choice of making more money in prevention of a disease instead of buying munitions or arms or things like that.
Okay, one last question. I think Marie Guy or Ruth Horn wanted to. I'm sorry, François Hirsch is going to follow up.
Just to follow up on the question raised by Hakim on the involvement of WHO. We had this meeting in Vienna, co-organized by Austria, UNESCO unit, and WHO. There was another one in Geneva last November, and they're going to be another one in May, also in Vienna, discussing on how CRISPR and could be better addressed by WHO. And I don't want to emphasize again, but you remember that in Brazzaville, the regional responsible for WHO was present as well, but she didn't come.
He was present, but he told me that they have no position so far. So WHO is not yet clearly involved in the discussion.
Okay, one last question. Marie Guy.
Okay, my name is Marie Guy. I'm a philosopher in the CNRS here, and I had 2 questions, very briefly. The first one would be about the distinction between care and research, and what would be your perspective on this distinction as far as genome editing would maybe very soon in various countries a routine medical practice. I would say. And my second point was that one of the reasons I am here is because I'm working on prenatal diagnosis as a research topic and ethical dimension of prenatal diagnosis. And I was wondering if you had envisioned some working groups about medical practice in the ARRIGE organization to consider the effect of genome editing, public debate on genome editing on such and such medical practice.
I will answer first to the second questions, and I will say just do it. For your first question, remember, yeah, it's fundamental to open to let research open, because as Francis showed this morning, we don't know where is a good research or where is the seminal research, and who would put money today in the research of the immune system of bacteria against viruses. Any sponsors of research should say you should focus on cancer or metabolic disorders instead of looking why bacteria fight against viruses. They should die, and like that we have no more needs for antibiotics. So research must be free. But it's clear that there is no real frontiers between research and care. Because, for example, one of the very important applications of CRISPR is now to create a model of human disorders using various types of cells or various types of organisms, because you can make a transgenic mouse or even a transgenic macaque much more rapidly with CRISPR than you can do with other methods. You can move, for example, with zebrafish. Within 3 weeks, you can make a transgenic model of gain of function or loss of function. So clearly, putting frontiers between what is research and what is already something with impact on care, maybe not directly a process of care, but with a clear impact on learning about the disease, changing the way to tackle the disease, it's very difficult to make. And in this way, genome editing is a real powerful way to increase our knowledge about disease.
Okay, thank you, Hervé. Mylène wanted to add just one brief sentence, and then François Hirsch will tell us where we are going to have lunch.
Yes, I just wanted to say that to answer your question, research should be at the service of care. And some countries do that, and I was witnessing how Cuba is using CRISPR-9 to respond to the local and national disease, and they associate all their research to immediate care needs. And I think it's very useful as an orientation and as an intention of research.
Okay, François.
Okay, good morning to all of you. So before inviting you to go to the lunch, which is across the road, you have to follow the people that will help you to go there. Please do not disperse. It's a nice area here, but please focus until tonight. And I wanted to... Can I get the slide on the sponsor, because I think it's good to Victor? Okay, so I wanted to say that this meeting has been provided through public funding only. So that's important to have that in mind. So it doesn't mean that the association will not welcome the funding from private company, but at this meeting, at the previous meeting in Paris, were funded by public. So I wanted to thank Ile-de-France, of course, it has been done already. Avison and CVT, so his representative here, it's Ines Amado. She can explain to you what is CVT. It's a it was a very generous sponsor. We have other sponsors with Espacetic Région Ile-de-France, who are represented here too. And 3 embassies help us to get some of you here. And thank for all of you to go through the strike. It was a long time we had no strike in France, by the way, to tell the truth. Like the last was in September. So it's amazing, but still you are here, which is great. So if you have any technical problem, you can come to me or to Yamina. You know, she's already around. She should be around. We were behind the curtain, but still available for you. And so enjoy the food and take some food, because this afternoon we need your input during this discussion on the various themes. Thank you very much.